Most gardeners put their tools away in October and wait for spring. And that is exactly why their gardens look the same every year. Because the gardeners whose yards stop you on the sidewalk in April, the ones where you slow down and wonder how they got that much color that fast, they are not better gardeners than you. They did not spend more money in spring. They made one decision in fall that you did not know you were supposed to make. They planted in October. And what happened underground through November, December, January, and February, in frozen soil, in snow, in conditions that look like nothing is happening at all, was the most important work their garden did all year. Today I am showing you 5 specific plants, the ones that reward fall planting more dramatically than anything else you can put in the ground this season. What they look like in April when they have had a full winter of root establishment versus what they look like when planted in spring is not a subtle difference. It is the difference between a garden that looks like it has been there for years and a garden that looks like it was just installed last week. 5 plants, fall planting, spring results that will make your neighbors stop and ask what you did. Let us get into it. Before plant number 1, drop a comment right now and tell me what state you are gardening in. Because fall planting timing is different in Zone 4 than it is in Zone 7, and I want to make sure the timing guidance I give you actually matches your conditions. Drop your state below. I read every single one. Plant 1 tulips. I know what some of you are thinking. Tulips. Everyone knows about tulips. And you are right that tulips are widely known as a fall-planted bulb. But I want to spend time on tulips specifically because the gap between how most Americans plant tulips and how tulips should be planted to produce the spring display that stops traffic is enormous. And most of it comes down to 3 specific decisions that the bag of bulbs at the hardware store never tells you about. First, the mechanism. Because understanding why tulips must be planted in fall rather than spring tells you everything about how to get the best possible results from them. Tulip bulbs require a period of cold temperatures, specifically sustained temperatures below 45 degrees Fahrenheit for a minimum of 12 to 16 weeks, to complete a biological process called vernalization. Vernalization is the cold-triggered hormonal shift that breaks the bulb's dormancy and initiates the cellular development of the flower inside. Without it, the bulb either does not bloom at all or produces a small, weak, single flower on a short stem that looks nothing like the photographs on the packaging. When you plant a tulip bulb in fall, vernalization happens naturally in the ground through winter. The cold does the work. You plant and forget and the biology completes itself while you are inside drinking coffee. When you try to plant tulips in spring, which most first-time gardeners attempt at least once, you are asking a bulb that has not been through vernalization to bloom immediately. It cannot. The result is a green shoot that emerges, produces a tight bud that never opens properly, and dies back having wasted its stored energy on an incomplete process. Fall planting is not a preference for tulips. It is a biological requirement. Now here are the 3 decisions that separate a good tulip planting from a spectacular one. Decision 1. Depth. Plant tulip bulbs at a depth of 6 to 8 inches from the soil surface to the base of the bulb. Most gardeners plant at 4 to 5 inches because it is easier, and the bag says 3 to 4 inches as a minimum. The deeper planting produces stronger, taller stems that hold the flower upright rather than flopping in spring rain. It also insulates the bulb from the freeze-thaw cycles that occur near the soil surface in early spring, which can prematurely trigger emergence before the last frost has passed. Decision 2. Variety selection for succession. Most gardeners buy one variety and get 1 week of tulip bloom. Buy early, mid, and late season varieties simultaneously and plant them together, and you get 4 to 5 weeks of continuous tulip color from the same bed. Darwin hybrid tulips for the tallest, most dramatic mid-season display. Triumph tulips for reliable mid-season performance in almost every American zone. And parrot tulips for the latest season, the most extraordinary and unusual flower forms available in the tulip world, with fringed and ruffled petals in colors that look almost artificially vivid. Decision 3. The naturalistic drift. Most gardeners plant tulips in straight rows or evenly spaced grids. The result looks like a municipal planting outside a government building. Scatter your bulbs across the planting area by literally tossing a handful and planting them where they land. The irregular, naturalistic distribution looks intentional in the way that straight rows never quite do. It looks like a garden rather than a pattern. USDA hardiness zones 3 through 8 for reliable annual performance. In zones 9 through 11, tulip bulbs require pre-chilling in a refrigerator for 12 to 16 weeks before fall planting because winter temperatures in those zones never drop low enough for natural vernalization. Store them away from fruit, which produces ethylene gas that damages bulbs, and plant in December or January after the chilling period is complete. Plant tulips before the ground freezes in your zone. In Zone 4, that means September and October. In Zone 7, October through November. In Zone 8, November through early December. Plant 2. Alliums. If tulips are the plant everyone knows to plant in fall, alliums are the plant almost nobody does. And the spring display they produce is so dramatically different from what most American gardeners have in their yards in May and June that the first time you see a mature allium planting in full bloom, you genuinely cannot believe it came from a bulb the size of a golf ball. Alliums are ornamental onions, the same genus as the onions and garlic in your vegetable garden, but bred specifically for the dramatic spherical flower heads that rise on tall, strong stems above the spring garden. And when I say dramatic, I want to be specific. Allium globemaster produces flower heads 8 to 10 inches in diameter, a globe of hundreds of tiny, star-shaped violet-purple flowers on a stem that reaches 32 inches tall. In late May, when it reaches peak bloom in most American zones, a planting of 5 globemaster alliums creates a presence in a garden that reads from across the street. Not across the yard, across the street. The scale of the flowers relative to everything blooming around them is something that photographs cannot fully convey until you have seen it in person. The reason fall planting matters specifically for alliums follows the same vernalization logic as tulips. The bulb requires cold to complete its internal development. But there is an additional reason that is worth understanding because it directly affects placement decisions. Allium foliage emerges before the flowers and dies back as the flowers are reaching peak bloom. The leaves are long, strap-shaped, and admittedly not beautiful in their dying phase. This is the one honest limitation of alliums that most gardening content glosses over. By the time the flower is spectacular in late May, the foliage at the base of the plant is yellowing and declining. The solution is simple and completely effective. Plant alliums behind or among perennials whose foliage expands through late spring. Catmint, salvia, hardy geranium, nepeta, any plant with spreading foliage that fills the mid-border space as spring progresses covers the declining allium leaves naturally and leaves only the spectacular flower globes visible above it. The combination of allium globes rising above a cloud of catmint in full lavender bloom is one of the best plant combinations in late spring gardening, and it solves the foliage problem completely. For variety selection beyond globemaster, Purple Sensation is the most vivid, most saturated purple available in the allium family, smaller in head size at 3 to 4 inches, but in a color so intense it reads as almost electric in late May light. Allium Mount Everest produces the same large globe form in pure white, which provides the visual contrast in a mixed planting that makes the purple varieties around it look even more saturated. An Allium schuberti produces the most extraordinary flower head of any allium available to American gardeners, a starburst of flowers on stems of different lengths radiating from a central point that looks like a fireworks explosion frozen in space. It dries on the stem, and holds that form through summer and into fall as an ornamental seed head that continues providing garden interest months after bloom. USDA hardiness zones 4 through 9 for most varieties. Plant at a depth of 3 times the diameter of the bulb. Full sun. Well-draining soil. That is the complete planting requirement for a flower that will produce one of the most extraordinary displays in your spring garden. Plant 3, Hellebore. This is where the video shifts from bulbs to perennials, and I want to spend a moment on why fall planting of perennials matters before I get into the specific plant, because the principle applies to every perennial you will ever plant, and most gardeners have never heard it stated clearly. A perennial planted in fall has from October through April to establish its root system before it is asked to support above-ground growth and flowering. That is 6 months of root development in relatively cool, moist soil conditions that are optimal for root growth. The plant arriving in spring is arriving with an established root system that has already explored the surrounding soil, established connections with soil biology, and stored the energy reserves that will fuel its first season of growth and bloom. A perennial planted in spring arrives with a nursery root ball and is immediately asked to support leaf emergence, stem extension, and flower production simultaneously with root establishment. The energy demands split. Root development is slower. The first season performance is a fraction of what fall-planted equivalents achieve. This principle applies to every perennial on this list and to essentially every perennial you will ever plant. Fall is better. The gap in first-year performance between fall and spring planting is visible and significant. With that established, Hellebore. Hellebore blooms in February, sometimes January in zones 7 and warmer, sometimes while snow is still on the ground in zones 5 and 6. The flowers emerge from evergreen foliage that has been sitting through the coldest months looking as healthy as it did in October, and they open into flowers of genuinely remarkable beauty, downward nodding, in deep burgundy, soft pink, white, near black, and complex spotted patterns that reward close examination in a way that most flowers do not. I covered Hellebore in the Deep Shade video, so I want to focus here on something specific to fall planting, rather than repeating that full description. A Hellebore planted in fall this October will bloom in February. Not February 3 years from now. February of next year, 4 months from now. A Hellebore planted in spring does not bloom its first year in most cases because the establishment stress of spring planting delays the flower bud development that requires a full season of undisturbed root growth to initiate. That difference, blooming in 4 months versus waiting a full year, is the most compelling argument for fall Hellebore planting, and it is almost never mentioned in mainstream gardening content because most garden centers sell Hellebore in spring and have no incentive to tell you that the plant performs better planted in fall. For variety selection, the Ice and Roses series is the most widely available in American nurseries and produces the most reliable bloom display across zones 4 through 9. Wedding Party produces fully double flowers that hold their ornamental quality significantly longer than single-flowered varieties. And Penny's Pink is the most vigorous and fastest establishing variety I have grown, reaching blooming size faster after fall planting than any other Hellebore in my experience. The one care instruction that produces Hellebore at its most spectacular: cut every existing leaf to the ground in late January before the flower buds open, was covered in detail in the Shade video. If you have not watched that one, the short version is this. Remove the old leaves. The flowers that were hiding underneath them, standing clean and revealed on bare stems, are dramatically more beautiful without the old foliage obscuring them. USDA hardiness zones 4 through 9, partial to full shade. Moist, humus-rich, well-draining soil, fall plant, February flowers. One of the best decisions you will make in your garden this season. Are you subscribed to this channel yet? Because if you are getting value from the specific information in this video, the mechanism explanations, the variety names, the honest planting guidance, this is what every video on this channel delivers. Subscribe right now and hit the notification bell. It takes 2 seconds, and it means every video I release comes directly to you. Hit subscribe before we go to plant 4. Plant 4, peonies. Peonies are one of the most loved and most frequently disappointing flowers in American home gardening. And the reason most peony plantings disappoint is almost always the same. They were planted at the wrong depth in spring rather than at the correct depth in fall, and the planting never recovered from that initial mistake, no matter how many years passed. Let me explain the depth issue specifically, because it is the single most important fact about peony planting, and the one most frequently gotten wrong. Peony eyes, the red buds on the crown that become next year's stems, must be planted at a depth of 1 to 2 inches below the soil surface. Not 3 inches, not 4 inches, 1 to 2 inches. In zones 3 through 5, 2 inches. In zones 6 through 8, 1 inch. In zones 9 and 10, plant the eyes at the soil surface or just barely below it. A peony planted too deep does not bloom. Not the first year, not the second year. Not ever until the crown has worked its way back toward the soil surface through its own growth, which can take years and may never happen completely in compacted soil. This is why thousands of American gardeners have peony plants that produce beautiful foliage every spring and no flowers year after year and cannot understand why. The crown is too deep. That is almost always the answer. Fall planting matters for peonies because the eyes need to experience cold temperatures to initiate the growth cycle that produces spring stems and flowers. A peony planted in fall at the correct depth goes through its natural cold requirement in the ground without any intervention. A peony planted in spring has missed that cold cycle and may produce weak, delayed growth its first season that never quite catches up to where a fall-planted equivalent is by the same point in the season. Beyond the depth and timing, peonies are one of the most permanent plants you can put in your garden. A correctly planted peony lives for 50 to 100 years. The peonies blooming in American gardens right now include plants that were put in the ground before World War II. They have never been moved, never been divided, never been replanted. They simply bloom more beautifully every passing decade as the root system deepens, and the crown produces more and more flowering stems each spring. A peony you plant this fall at the correct depth is a plant that will potentially be blooming in your garden for the rest of your life and beyond it. For variety selection, Sarah Bernhardt is the most widely available peony in the American market, a double-flowered soft pink that has been in cultivation for over a century and remains one of the most reliable performers across American growing zones. Festiva maxima produces large white flowers with occasional red flecks at the center, one of the most elegant peony flowers available and extraordinarily fragrant. Carl Rosenfield is the deepest red peony widely available, a saturated crimson that photographs spectacularly and holds its color through heat better than lighter varieties. And for gardeners in zones 7 through 9, where peony performance can be inconsistent due to insufficient winter cold, Sarah Bernhardt and Festiva maxima have the lowest cold requirement of any widely available varieties and are the correct selections for borderline climates. USDA hardiness zones 3 through 8. Full sun, minimum 6 hours. Rich, well-amended, well-draining soil. Soil pH of 6 to 7. Plant eyes at 1 to 2 inches depth depending on zone. Do not rush this. Do not plant deep because it feels more secure. 1 to 2 inches. That measurement is the difference between a peony that blooms every May for the next 50 years and one that produces nothing but beautiful leaves. Ants on peony buds are not a problem and do not need to be treated. They are feeding on a natural nectar the buds produce and have no negative effect on the flowers whatsoever. Leave them alone. Plant 5. Fall-planted ornamental garlic and Camassia. I am ending with 2 plants together because they solve the same specific problem, which is the gap in the spring bloom calendar between the early tulips and alliums of April and May, and the main perennial bloom of June and July. And because most American gardeners have never planted either of them despite both being widely available and both producing spring displays that generate more questions from visitors than almost anything else in the garden. Ornamental garlic first. Not Allium globemaster, which we covered earlier. The species Alliums, specifically Allium mole and Allium unifolium, which stay lower and bloom earlier and fill a different role in the spring garden than the tall, dramatic globes. Allium mole produces bright golden yellow star-shaped flowers in late April and May on stems that reach 8 to 10 inches tall. Yellow is genuinely rare in the Allium family, and in the spring garden generally, and the combination of golden yellow Allium flowers with purple tulips or blue grape hyacinths creates a color contrast that looks designed rather than accidental. It naturalizes readily, meaning it spreads and multiplies from the original planting without any help from you, producing more flowers each successive spring from the same original investment. Allium unifolium is native to the Pacific coast of North America and produces delicate rose-pink flowers in loose clusters in May. Where the large alliums are dramatic and architectural, unifolium is soft and naturalistic, appropriate for cottage garden settings and mixed perennial borders where the massive globes of globemaster would feel out of scale. Camassia. This is the plant I expect most people watching to have never grown and possibly never heard of, and it is one of the most genuinely beautiful spring bulbs available to American gardeners. Camassia, specifically Camassia leichlanii, is a North American native bulb that produces tall spikes of star-shaped flowers in deep violet blue, rich purple, or creamy white in May and June, rising on stems that reach 24 to 36 inches tall. The flower spikes open from the bottom up over a period of 2 to 3 weeks, which means the bloom period is longer than most spring bulbs, and the display evolves as the spike fills in from base to tip. The color of the blue and purple varieties is genuinely extraordinary. It is one of the truest, most saturated blues available in the spring garden, in a season where blue flowers are relatively rare and disproportionately valued. Combined with late tulips or early alliums, Camassia provides the blue component of a spring color combination that most gardeners spend years trying to achieve through other means. And it naturalizes in moist soil conditions with no help from you. Plant it once in a spot with decent moisture retention, and it multiplies quietly through the years, producing more flowering stems each spring from the original planting. USDA hardiness zones 4 through 8, full sun to partial shade, moist, humus-rich soil. Plant bulbs 4 inches deep and 4 to 6 inches apart in fall. No special preparation, no fertilizer at planting, no special care through winter. Just plant them and wait for May. The timing guide. I want to give you the specific fall planting windows for each zone before this video ends, because timing is the one variable that determines whether fall-planted bulbs and perennials establish successfully or sit in the ground too long before cold arrives. Zone 3 and 4. September through mid-October. You have the shortest window and the earliest hard freeze. Prioritize getting everything in the ground by the first week of October. Zone 5 and 6. October through early November. This is the ideal window for most of the plants on this list. Cool soil temperatures and consistent moisture through fall create the best possible establishment conditions. Zone 7, October through November. You have more flexibility than northern zones. Soil stays workable longer and winter cold arrives more gradually, giving roots more time to establish before hard freeze. Zone 8. November through December. In the warmest parts of Zone 8, December planting of bulbs is completely appropriate. Perennials can go in as late November and still establish before the mild winters of those regions. Zone 9 and 10. Tulip and hyacinth bulbs require refrigerator pre-chilling as described earlier. Plant pre-chilled bulbs in December or January. Hellebore and peonies perform less reliably in these zones due to insufficient winter cold. Camassia and species Alliums are your strongest options for reliable fall-planted spring color in the warmest American zones. But the gardeners whose yards look spectacular every April did not get lucky. They did not spend more money than you in spring. They walked through their garden in October, put 5 things in the ground, and let the winter do the work that makes spring look effortless. Tulips for the drama, Alliums for the architecture, Hellebore for the February surprise, Peonies for the next 50 years, Camassia for the blue that nothing else in spring quite provides. 5 plants, 1 fall afternoon, a spring garden next April that people slow down to look at. That is the whole plan. Go implement it. If this video saved you time and gave you something specific and actionable, subscribe to this channel right now. Share this with one gardener you know who is about to put their tools away for the season without knowing they have the best planting window of the year still open in front of them. And drop a comment below telling me which of these 5 you are planting this fall and what zone you are in. I read everyone, and I want to see how many states show up in the comments before the week is out. Go plant something. The ground is still open. Use it.